24 hours since the U.S. struck Iran's nuclear sites. Right now, we are on the brink of war. Many wondering what is next. Good evening, and thank you for tuning in for NewsNation's continued special coverage. I'm Marnie Hughes in Chicago. At this hour, we know you have a lot of questions. You may feel relief Iran's nuclear capability has been diminished. You may also feel uneasy with the decision to strike. At the same time, a lot of us are wondering if, when, and how Iran chooses to strike back. Iran, in response, now says that the U.S. decided to destroy diplomacy, and they will decide the timing, nature, and scale of their response. Iranian state media says every American soldier and citizen in the region is a legitimate target. Right now, Iran's foreign minister is heading to Russia to speak with Vladimir Putin. From Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, Iran has a choice.
Anything can happen in conflict, we acknowledge that, but the scope of this was intentionally limited. That's the message that we're sending. With the capabilities of the American military, nearly unlimited. So Iran, in that sense, has a choice.
Here's what we know at this hour. Iran is reportedly moving to close the Strait of Hormuz. This is a passage that facilitates 20% of the global oil supply. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says that would be economic suicide. We're also monitoring word coming out of the White House at this hour. President Trump is floating the idea of a regime change in Iran. On Truth Social, he says it's not politically correct to use the term regime change, but if the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be a regime change? Meanwhile, Iran's supreme leader, the Ayatollah Khamenei, is reportedly sheltering in a bunker, preparing for the worst. He has named possible replacements for himself. Joining us now, James Jeffery, former U.S. ambassador to Iraq and Turkey. Thank you, sir, for your time. Let's start with Khamenei hiding in a bunker. Your reaction to that reporting at this hour, given what has transpired these last 24 hours?
Well, first, thanks for having me on. He may be hiding in a bunker, but if history is any guide to his proxies and pals and subordinates who've hidden in bunkers from Beirut to downtown Tehran, that's not going to help him much if the Israelis decide to take him out. I don't think the U.S. would. There are laws, including assassination, against that. But the Israelis would not be so inhibited. However, at this point, it doesn't make much sense politically because we need somebody in charge.
Just as the U.S. would have contingency plans after this strike, preparing for the possibility of what's next, Iran must have had also contingencies if they were in fact hit and these nuclear sites were struck. Is it a matter of when, not if, that Iran strikes back and retaliates?
It may be, but when you're hit out of the blue so dramatically like this, most of your plans go up in flames along with your nuclear sites. I've looked at the first 6 months after we were hit at Pearl Harbor, and almost everything we tried, defending the Philippines, defending the Dutch East Indies, was all for naught. On the other hand, we did come up with the brilliant idea of attacking by long-range bombers Tokyo out of the blue. We hadn't had that plan before. So Iran is capable of doing that, but I cannot underline too much how discombobulated their chain of command and their leadership is right now.
Is diplomacy, in your mind, still on the table at this point?
One of my 40 or now 50-year preoccupations is to try to eliminate this idea of a divide between military or other coercive measures such as sanctions, such as trade warfare, and diplomacy. Diplomacy is how you put everything together to pursue national interests. It always is on the table. The question is how you work in diplomacy with your military actions and your other tools such as sanctions. President Trump put a very good deal on the table, so good that many people who were opposed to the Iranian nuclear program thought he was too lenient. The Iranians slapped it down. If they think that we will negotiate with them endlessly, which is what we did in previous administrations that I was involved in, Iran got to think it differently this time, didn't they?
Ambassador, I want to talk about the Strait of Hormuz, the strategic importance of this area and the impact on oil prices. That is a threat right now that will be closed. Iran looks as though it may be moving to do so. How concerning is that?
It is obviously concerning. Any additional move that Iran takes is something that we have to take into consideration. But just as Iran has plans to close the straits, the United States has ways to try to keep the straits open. The problem is, as we saw in the Red Sea with the Houthis, it's very difficult to persuade commercial lifters of oil and other products to pass through war zones if there's any chance whatsoever of being hit. So this is of some concern, but in the end, we can cope with it one way or the other. First of all, Iran is very dependent upon these oil exports itself. It's not in the same economic condition that the Gulf states are with their huge sovereign wealth funds. They could ride this out for a while. They also have other means of getting their hydrocarbons out. And finally, China is a major customer of oil from the Gulf, and China has a great deal of influence over Iran.
Yeah, so a great likelihood of a coordinated international response given the strategic importance of the strait. James, Jeffery, thank you, Ambassador, so much for your time and as we measure this moment in history.
Thank you.
All right, the focus so far on Iran's nuclear facilities and capabilities, but in addition, cities across Israel right now feeling the impact. NewsNation's Robert Sherman is in Tel Aviv just after 2 a.m. local time there. Robert, a sleepless night, no doubt, for many. What is the word on the ground and the feeling given some of these latest developments?
Yeah, if you take a look at that live picture of Tel Aviv right next to us here, Marnie, really just gives you an indication. Things are very quiet tonight, particularly the way that they've been throughout the day on the streets, the cafes, the restaurants. A lot of people have not been out and about. And the reason for that is that the Israeli leadership is saying that they want everyone to be at their highest level of alertness. Their recommendations, the home front command guidance, don't go outside if you don't need to. Schools are closed. Work is closed in many cases, as they do believe that there is a looming threat that is on the horizon, a threat that we saw play out before our eyes this morning here with a pair of Iranian missile barrages fired in our direction, the tip of that response from Iran that we've seen so far. And once more, we saw ballistic missiles slipping past the Iron Dome defense system, leaving craters across this country. Cities such as Haifa to the north, central Israel, where we are, all getting hit with over 80 people being injured as a result of all of this, which indicates that there's still more work to be done. And that was one of the messages from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who addressed the public this evening, still in a bunker, which underscores the ever-present threat that still exists here. But we were able to glean a little bit of better perspective as to exactly why Israel felt threatened, why they felt the need in order to carry out these operations against Iran. And this is what the Prime Minister had to say to that. Take a listen.
They had enough enriched uranium because we could delay them, but we couldn't stop them from enriching uranium. So they had enough of that, 9 or 10 bombs worth of enriched uranium. But they needed to make the bomb itself. And the bomb itself they rushed to do right after the collapse of the terror axis and the removal of Nasrallah. Therefore, we had to act. We were in the 12th hour. We knew that we wouldn't have a 13th hour.
Prime Minister also spoke to the ballistic missile capabilities that Iran has, and that is what we have seen the Israeli Air Force continuing to strike tonight. Showing that the threat is far from removed here. We have seen the Israeli Air Force carrying out operations in western Iran over Tehran. Again, major focus on those ballistic missile sites here. And we anticipate that that is going to continue throughout the week here until they feel satisfied that they've eliminated that aspect of the threat. Marnie.
Robert, the U.S. has talked about getting Iran back to the negotiating table. Do they seem willing to do that?
Well, as we always talk about, Marnie, there's that distinction to be made between what is said publicly and what is said in the back channels or behind closed doors. Publicly, Iran making clear they don't really have much of an appetite to negotiate with the United States. They are not trusting of the Americans. This is the statement that Iran's foreign minister put out. I want to read that for you. He says, quote, "Last week we were in negotiations with the U.S. when Israel decided to blow up that diplomacy. This week we held talks with the E3 EU
when the U.S. decided to blow up that diplomacy. What conclusion would you draw? To Britain and the EU high rep, it is Iran which must return to the table. But how can Iran return to something it never left, let alone blew up? That's the Iranian view here tonight, is that they believe that they did nothing wrong, that they were negotiating in good faith, and now that there is no reason to return to the negotiating table because they're very distrusting of the United States. But of course, the Americans and other allies throughout Europe trying to push Tehran back to the negotiating table. Only time will tell if that will work. Marnie?
Robert Sherman in Tel Aviv, thank you. After 36 hours in the air, the 7 B-2 bombers involved in Operation Midnight Hammer have returned home to Whitman Air Force Base. Their return coming as we get a better understanding of the timeline of this entire attack. Just after midnight Saturday, 9 B-2 stealth bombers took off in Johnson County, Missouri, with 2 diverting to the Pacific Ocean as a decoy. The rest flying 18 hours to their targets in Iran, where they were met with support aircraft. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General J. Daniel Kane, with what happened next.
Once over land, the B-2s linked up with escort and support aircraft in a complex, tightly timed maneuver requiring exact synchronization across multiple platforms in a narrow piece of airspace, all done with minimal communications. As the Operation Midnight Hammer strike package entered Iranian airspace, the U.S. employed several deception tactics, including decoys, as the 4th and 5th generation aircraft pushed out in front of the strike package at high altitude and high speed, sweeping in front of the package for enemy fighters and surface-to-air missile threats.
Here now, NewsNation senior national security analyst, Lieutenant General Richard Newton. Good evening to you, and thank you for joining us. As we get more details on the strike and the timeline, what stands out to you about the stealthness and the challenges in carrying out this mission?
First and foremost, Marty, the scope and the scale of this strike package is remarkable. As General Kane alluded to, the synchronization, the integration of this, of nearly 125 aircraft, including also some Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles that were launched by submarines. Only the United States military can carry this off and so forth. So that is extraordinary in and of itself. The other aspect of this is really the extraordinary operation security, the OPSEC around it that kept this under wraps actually for months leading up to the actual strike package going into the target area in Iran. By the way, Marty, this was the largest B-2 strike package ever. And it's the first time that we've employed with the B-2s or any aircraft, the bunker busters, those 30,000-pound bunker busters. So it's quite a historic achievement as well as a military feat.
I'd love to get your reaction to the coordination that must have happened between Israel and the U.S. in preparation for these strikes.
Well, first and foremost, let me back up just a little bit. You know, our B-2 aircrews, I was the first B-2 stealth bomber squadron commander back in the 90s. But these aircrews, the entire U.S. military package of men and women, both in the aircraft as well as at sea, you know, this is the best. They're the best in the world. They've actually had this target folders for years, so this was not something particularly new. They've been practicing this for a long time. But as the strike package actually launched out of Whiteman Air Force Base, as you alluded to, around midnight on Friday night, as it got closer to the target area, there had to be, and there was, through the U.S. Central Command, General Kurilla and his team, very quiet but close coordination, but with the Israeli Air Force, because again, they've been operating there for 10 days. They have gained total air superiority, been flying and fighting over the skies of Iran. And so that close coordination for the deconfliction aspect of this was also key. Once the B-2 strike package and the other elements of the package started to reach closer to the target area and the time.
Right, opened up the opportunity. I want to play a portion of what Vice President Vance said about the decision earlier today.
The final decision, Kristen, of course, is made right before, and I'm talking about minutes before the bombs were dropped. And of course, well, that was last night. And the president made very clear that the purpose here is to eliminate the Iranian nuclear program.
You've been in the Situation Room. Tell us about that moment to make a decision like this, and also the strategy to then have these decoy B-2s.
Well, the whole idea, again, the president was briefed, several days, if not weeks, in advance of what potentially this target package would look like, and what the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, from a military standpoint, and his other advisors were providing the president options right up to the last moment before he gave the go order. Also, was providing him the latest intelligence update from a military tactician standpoint, as well as if there were, what could be second and third order effects. So the president was as informed as he possibly could be leading up to the go order and so forth. What was key, though, is they had to back that up, on or about the two B-2 packages actually launched around midnight on Friday night. The first one was that deception package, which was just extraordinary. That took off to the west with those 6 B-2s. And we woke up Saturday morning thinking there were a number of B-2s just heading towards Guam, when in reality there was a significant package of B-2 bombers taking off to the east, joining up with that air bridge that had been established several days prior, and tanking up and receiving air refueling at night at high altitudes with KC-135 tankers, which are Boeing 707-like aircraft. And then getting into the target area. As they got closer to Iran, once they got over land in that area, they were joined up by, as what General Kane said, those 4th and 5th generation fighters. Those are F-22s and F-35 aircraft, which escorted the B-2s into the target area. And then they provided that sweep of what we call suppression of enemy air defenses, and actually launched weapons against, right before the B-2s went into targets, and launched against, what would have been, Iranian surface-to-air missiles. Now, the whole aspect of this is, Marnie, at the same time, and what we've learned is the Iranians never saw us coming. Not a shot was fired ingressing into the target, or not a shot was fired, egressing from the target. That's remarkable. And so that's really what the key command and control of this and the operation security. One more point is the synchronization aspect of this is you've got actually the launching of the Tomahawk land attack missiles from the submarines were actually launched before the B-2s actually launched their bombs against their targets at Natanz and Fordow. And so, but they didn't actually hit the targets until the B-2s were actually post-target hitting those 2 nuclear sites when they went after at Isfahan.
Just layer after layer of coordination between all involved to be able to carry out this with such strategic precision. The question now becomes, how will Iran retaliate? I know you're going to be sticking around, Lieutenant General Richard Newton, to talk about the threat not only to our U.S. troops in bases in the Middle East and across the world, but also the threat here at home. So we'll be talking to you again shortly. Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.